Hello, my name's David Haney. I am the director of the Committee on Ministerial Care. We are thankful that you have joined us for this webinar presentation today. With me as the presenters today are Ken Vandermolen. Ken is a ruling elder at Harvest OPC in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ken is also an investment representative for RSC Advisors. And we're thankful Ken can be with us today. Ken also serves as a member of the Committee on Ministerial Care. Also presenting today will be Greg DeYoung. Greg is a ruling elder from Bethel OPC in Wheaton, Illinois. He also is an investment advisor with Savant Capital Management. Greg also is the son of an OPC minister and a member of the Committee on Ministerial Care. Gentlemen, welcome today. And as we begin, I'd like to turn things over in a moment to Ken Vandermolen. But before we do, the topic we'll be covering today is, will I ever be able to retire? And as we address that topic today, we will do so in 3 segments. One entitled, What Should I Be Doing Now? The second, What Should I Focus On with 5 years or less? And the third, How can I make retirement more affordable? So let's begin with the first topic, what should I be doing now? Ken, may I ask you to start us off?
Thank you, David. Under the heading, what should I be doing now? Let's first look at focusing on debt. Proverbs 15, verse 22 says, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. The information that you hear about today may be familiar to you, or maybe something new. All those listening today are at different financial time periods in their lives. We hope you hear of some ideas today that will be helpful. That said, let's focus on debt. In 2015, Pew Charitable Trust reported that 8 out of 10 Americans have debts with an average of $67,900 per person. There is good debt and bad debt. Some debt can be useful that will help you in the future to improve your finances, like buying a home or going to college. Bad debt, like credit cards, does nothing to increase your income. So step 1 is to gather information about your financial situation regarding debt. How much and what is the charged interest by percent? Focus on paying off the expensive debt and make the minimum payments on the cheaper debt. When one is paid off, work your way on down the list. Second suggestion regarding debt, did you receive an income tax refund last year? That refund is the government sending you back your own withholdings on your wages. Consider contacting your CPA or church treasurer and make some adjustments to decrease your withholdings and use that money for current debts or contributions towards your retirement. And thirdly, pay bills on time. It is easy to miss payments unless you have a written plan, and those late charges can add up fast. Greg, what do you have as some ideas regarding what should I be doing now?
Thanks, Ken. Let's take a look next at some ways that you might be able to minimize your taxes. And I'm going to comment briefly on why it's important to know your marginal tax rate, and then how this may have some bearing on how you should be saving toward your retirement. So first of all, reducing your taxable income. Hopefully, everyone that's on the call today is aware of the minister's housing allowance and the significant tax benefit which this can represent. This can allow you to receive a major portion of your cash compensation without it being considered taxable income to you. In addition, you are probably aware of several other things which ministers can subtract from their taxable income. These have to be pursuant to what is known as an accountable expense reimbursement policy. Hopefully, your session has approved such a policy, because this allows you to be reimbursed for such items as your automobile mileage, taking parishioners out for a meal, and even conference or other continuing education expenses. And all of those expenses then serve to reduce your taxable income. And then, of course, if you're eligible, contributing to a health savings account is another excellent way to reduce your taxable income. Note that at this point, I'm not listing contributions to a retirement plan, but we'll come back to that shortly. Next, it's helpful to know what your marginal tax rate is. And to do that, let's take a look at an example. First, I've listed a minister whose total cash compensation is $70,000. He is able to designate $24,000 of that as housing allowance. In addition, I'm assuming he has $3,000 of accountable reimbursed expenses. So that would bring his federal taxable compensation down quite a ways already to $43,000. As you may recall, if you listened to our first webinar a few months ago, one of the big changes with the new tax law that took effect at the beginning of 2018 is that we all now have a standard deduction which is significantly higher than in prior years. If you're a married taxpayer filing jointly and you are each 65 or younger, that standard deduction is $24,000. So as you can see, this minister's taxable income is only $19,000 on a package of $70,000. And here's a pleasant surprise. The federal income tax rate on $19,000 of income is only 10%. Now, I didn't list the tax brackets here because, quite frankly, they make my eyes glaze over. But at $19,000, he would be right near the top of the 10% rate, which goes up to $19,050. But guess what? Above that, the rate increases only to 12%. And that 12% rate stays in effect all the way up to $77,000 of federal taxable income. So I'd like you to just let that sink in for a moment. Unless you are a minister with some fairly unusual circumstances, you are not paying federal taxes on a significant portion of your income. And then what is taxable is only taxed at a 10 or perhaps 12% rate. Now I realize I'm not including state income taxes, which would apply for many of us, but even if we do include those, ministers typically have a very low marginal tax rate. This brings up an important question. As you set aside some of your compensation into a retirement account each year, should you be doing so on a pre-tax basis, or should those be after-tax Roth contributions? Let's think back to our example for a moment and assume that our minister is able to set aside $500 a month, or in other words, $6,000 a year, into a retirement plan. Because we saw that his final income was being taxed at 10%, if he's able to reduce his taxable income another $6,000 by doing pre-tax contributions, that would save him 10% of $6,000 or $600. Now, $600 is $600, I'll admit, but I'm going to argue that this is probably not the best course of action. Instead, I would recommend that ministers in the 10 or 12% tax bracket think very seriously about designating their retirement savings as after-tax Roth contributions and work to build as big of a balance as you can in Roth accounts before you retire. You can do this through the OPC 403B plan, which allows either pre-tax or Roth contributions, or you could also accomplish this through a Roth IRA for you or your spouse. Remember, the withdrawals from a Roth account will be tax-free for the rest of your life and can even pass to your children tax-free as well. In my opinion, a Roth account is the best retirement vehicle we'll ever see. Now, someone might object, but Greg, I would rather get even the small tax savings of the pre-tax contribution today because I think I might be in a zero tax bracket in my retirement. And especially because I read that I can take pre-tax money out of the OPC 403B plan each year in retirement and claim it as tax-free housing allowance? Well, my response would be yes, that could be the case, but bear in mind that future tax rates and tax brackets can change. And if anything, I personally would guess that they are likely to go higher. Also, I think it would be somewhat questionable to assume that the minister's housing allowance will survive indefinitely. Let's return to our example for a moment and consider a minister with lower overall compensation and see how this might give rise to one other tax-saving strategy. Here you can see that we have a minister whose total cash compensation is $50,000. I've kept the housing allowance and the reimbursements the same, and you see that taxable compensation is now $23,000. As the standard deduction remains the same at $24,000, this minister could have had an additional $1,000 of taxable income, and he still wouldn't have paid a penny of federal taxes. Well, this leads me to my last point, and that is always try to fill up the zero tax bracket. If you or your spouse have any money in pre-tax retirement accounts, such as traditional IRAs, 401k, or 403b, and you have a low income year, always make sure you fill up the zero tax bracket by converting some of that pre-tax retirement money into a Roth account. To illustrate this point, let's use a slightly different example where we have a minister with relatively low cash compensation of $40,000, perhaps because he was only employed for a portion of the year. His federal taxable income is $15,000, and we still have the standard deduction of $24,000. Whatever the circumstances were that led to this, there is a gap between the federal taxable compensation and the standard deduction of $9,000. Since he could recognize an additional $9,000 of taxable income and still pay no taxes, this presents an ideal opportunity to convert $9,000 of his or his wife's pre-tax retirement money into a Roth account. Roth conversions are fully taxable transactions, but if your tax rate is zero, this gives you a great opportunity. To summarize, if you are ever having a low income year, you should have a tax estimate run in October or November to determine if you've got the room to do some Roth conversion before December 31. Ken, what else should ministers be considering at this stage in life?
Thank you, Greg. Budgeting carefully is very important. After reviewing your kinds of debt, your tax situation, and a potential plan for retirement financing, let's address a detailed budget. Budgeting allows you to create a spending plan for your money. It ensures that you will always have enough money for the things you need and the things that are important to you. Following a budget or spending plan will also help you get out of debt or help you work your way out of debt. If you are currently in debt and need some assistance on how to get started with a budgeting plan, I have included on the Committee on Ministerial Care's website a helpful detailed worksheet, as well as some recommended retirement calculators and smartphone apps to help you get started. Once you get all your financial information written down, refer to it regularly and keep it up to date. When you have gathered and used the above mentioned tools for pre-retirement projections, you will have the confidence that you will have a more accurate and realistic idea of how much you will need in retirement. Remember to make sure one of those areas you're saving for is your retirement. And Greg, let me move into the next area for what should I be doing now. And this has to do with your children 18 years old and up. I want to bring up that subject of what to do with those children living with you or living outside your house 18 years old and up. Think about this, your retirement versus college costs. College is typically 4 years, and your retirement is for 20 years or more, with life expectancy tables getting longer. Sure, you want the best for your children. It is about prioritizing, and that means putting a vast amount of your money toward your retirement. We want to help our children to succeed, but we sometimes focus on the present at the expense of the future. I think you've heard it said, put on your own oxygen mask first before you help the person next to you, even if that person next to you is your child. Stop supporting them. Okay, Greg, what do you have next for our listeners?
Well, let's talk for a few moments about Social Security and Medicare. Most people think of Social Security as the government program which provides a check to retirees. But in fact, the Social Security system encompasses a number of different benefits, including disability benefits, a small life insurance benefit, and most importantly for our discussion today, retiree health insurance benefits through the Medicare program. For better or worse, healthcare in the United States for those age 65 and older uses Medicare as its foundation. While private insurance is available for retirees, these are mostly Medicare supplement policies, which assume that you have Medicare and it's providing your primary insurance. I would like to address these next comments, particularly to those ministers who may have opted out of Social Security, or more accurately, who have filed IRS Form 4361, exempting them from the payment of FICA taxes for those who are classified as an employee, or SECA taxes for ministers and those who are self-employed. The vital question is, will you or your spouse have earned at least 30 quarters of Social Security credit, and ideally 40 quarters by the time you reach age 65? Fortunately, Medicare is available to every U.S. citizen, regardless of whether they have paid FICA or SECA taxes. But as you can see, the cost for a couple who doesn't have at least 30 quarters is substantial. If neither you nor your spouse have 40 quarters, I would strongly advise that you do everything within your power to get one of you up to 40 quarters before age 65. On a positive note, this may not be as difficult as it sounds. First, only one of you needs to reach 40 quarters. Even if the other spouse would have no quarters of credit, both of you would still be eligible for Medicare at the lowest cost. Second, it only takes $1,360 of wages in a quarter, or about $100 a week, for you to receive a quarter of credit. Third, remember that if you filed Form 4361, only a minister's compensation related to his work as a minister can be exempted from FICA-SECA taxes. So any type of non-ministerial employment would be subject to SECA taxes and will allow you to earn additional quarters of credit. In other words, this might be an excellent time to dig that old saxophone out of the closet and begin giving some music lessons. To advertise, maybe you could accompany the singing at your next Presbytery meeting. David, over to you.
Well, thank you, Greg and Ken. That was very helpful information. It certainly helps bring into focus what we should not only be thinking about, but what we should be doing now. But in order to help our participants further, please share with us, what should I focus on with 5 years or less to retirement? Ken, what do you have?
Thank you, David. With 5 years to go, the tendency is to get conservative, too conservative with your investments as you get closer to retirement. Don't turn that switch from growth stocks to conservative investments just yet. A rule of thumb could be to take your age from 100, and the difference is the percent you should be in equity or stock market investments. I'll repeat that. A rule of thumb could be to take your age from 100, and the difference is the percent you should be in equity or stock market investments. However, everyone's risk tolerance is different. I know that Greg will have something to say about retirement analysis that can help on the topic of investing differently. In my opinion, with the life expectancy tables going out farther, don't let off the gas pedal too early with your investments. Greg, I have been asked years to live versus years to retire. If one considers retiring at age 65, the chance of living 20 years is greater than one who would wait until 70 to retire. Having a sense of your life expectancy and how many years in retirement are important facts to help you manage to protect and grow your nest egg. That is why you want to keep some growth in your investment program. Your turn, Greg.
Thanks, Ken. I'd like to spend a few moments next talking about what I've labeled here a detailed retirement analysis. This is a tool that could be very significant if you are in that final 5 years leading up to retirement. Although this type of analysis or projection could be called a number of different things, the key factor, I believe, is that it includes what's known as a Monte Carlo simulation of future investment returns. I'll flesh that out more in a few minutes. We've all no doubt heard a rule of thumb or two regarding retirement, such as you'll need 2/3 of your pre-retirement income during your retirement years, or you'll be okay as long as you're not withdrawing any more than 4% from your savings each year. The difficulty is that while these rules of thumb may apply to some people in some situations, they probably don't take into account your unique circumstances, and thus they aren't going to be a reliable way for you to make such a major and potentially irreversible decision. The shortcoming of relying on something like the safe withdrawal rate is that it can fall apart if you happen to retire at the wrong time. Perhaps some of us can think of a person we know who retired in the mid-2000s, a year or two before the Great Recession hit. And then that person found they had to go back to work as the value of their retirement investments plunged. So should you seek out one of these detailed retirement analyses? I would suggest that you first add up your expected income during retirement from sources such as Social Security, a pension, if you or your wife would qualify for one, and perhaps income from rental property or any other sources that you can count on. If the total of that income will equal or come close to equaling your expected expenses in retirement, then no, this type of detailed retirement analysis is probably not critical for you. However, many people, I would say probably most people, find that those expected income sources alone are only going to provide a portion of the income they'll need, and they're going to be relying on their invested nest egg to generate additional income. Here's where this retirement analysis could be quite valuable. One of the shortcomings of the more simplistic retirement calculators, including something that you might do yourself on a yellow pad with a calculator or using an Excel spreadsheet, is the use of an assumed future rate of return on your investments. Regardless of what assumed return you plug in, whether it's pretty low and conservative or pretty high and aggressive, we know that the investment world just doesn't produce consistent returns year after year. Here's where this Monte Carlo simulation comes into play. Instead of assuming an average rate of return year after year, this type of planning software will vary both the yearly returns and the sequence of those yearly returns. usually by running 1,000 different return scenarios. You might be asking, well, what if I would retire and the next year we have another 2008 and the financial markets plunge? Or what if I had retired at the start of what they call the lost decade back in 2000? Well, the Monte Carlo simulation contemplates those scenarios and many, many more. This type of analysis can also take into account that you will have different types of expenses in retirement. And some, such as healthcare or maybe late in life long-term care expenses, are likely to increase at a faster rate than the general inflation rate. If you're already working with a financial advisor, ask if they have access to financial planning software which can run this type of retirement analysis for you. For those ministers who do not have a financial advisor with this capability and cannot afford to engage one, the Committee on Ministerial Care does have a limited capacity to provide this type of analysis for ministers who are approaching retirement. David?
Well, men, thank you for these valuable insights. Realizing that many of us may have somewhat limited resources in our retirement years, how can we make retirement more affordable? Ken?
Thank you, David. I would like to address some suggestions to help in what to do to make retirement more affordable. If your area has a high cost of living, you're automatically going to need a larger sum of your retirement accounts than someone who lives in a more affordable location. If you can stomach the change, you may be better off moving to a more affordable state, town, or neighborhood where living expenses are lower. Consider your potential new location's taxes and remember to factor in real estate costs or expenses associated with selling your old home and buying a new one. If you're going to go this route, make sure the move is actually going to reduce your living expenses over the long term first. You may also want to consider selling off some of your unused possessions so you don't have to pay as much to move. If you own a home that has become too large for you, downsizing to a smaller, more affordable home could do wonders for your budget. This is especially a good idea if you still have a mortgage on the home. Having a mortgage in retirement adds a certain element of risk. If you end up drawing down your retirement accounts faster than you anticipated, it could affect your budget projections in negative ways. Even if you don't have a mortgage, downsizing may still be a good idea because you could reduce your property taxes and homeowners insurance. A place to start could be to Google the top 10 low-cost or low-tax areas to live in the United States. Something also that is becoming more popular is co-living arrangements with your children. Sharing costs with them can make your retirement dollars go farther. This can be a win-win situation for both you and your family. If you want to stay put and you have an extra room in the home, rent out part of your home for income. Consider a place like Airbnb. Arrangements like that could be for your older children to pay rent for living in your home. Okay, Greg, hopefully this was helpful, and if you don't mind, I'm going to try to tackle earning during retirement. In this segment, I'm just going to list some items, and maybe one or two might just jump out at you, and you can say, yes, that might be something for me to investigate. So consider part-time work, especially with all the help wanted signs plastered all over in our current growing economy. Teaching at a local school or college. How about tutoring at a homeschool association which is in need of an expert in your field? Stated pulpit supply in or around your presbytery. A hobby turned into a side business. How about writing and publishing a book? Network with those in your church and friends to look out for potential work. This list is by no means exhaustive, but hopefully it may have given you a few ideas and give you hope that there is something out there to earn money during retirement. Greg, that's all from me at this time. It's all yours.
All right, let's take a look lastly at a unique way that ministers may be able to minimize their taxes in retirement. And first, let's consider the tax situation which will face the typical retiree. Social Security benefits may be taxable depending on overall level of income. For most people, at least some Social Security benefits are probably going to be taxed. The withdrawals that the typical retiree takes from his or her 401k plan or traditional IRA are going to be considered fully taxable income. And then thirdly, withdrawals from a Roth account will always be tax-free, as I had mentioned earlier. This is why I believe the Roth account is the gold standard of retirement plans. But now let's take a look at the situation for a retired minister. We have the same tax treatment for the first three categories, but something quite different and unexpected for the fourth category, namely the OPC 403B plan. By all rights, this type of account should be treated the same as a 401k or traditional IRA. If you are putting your money in on a pre-tax basis, then those withdrawals should be considered fully taxable income to you as they come out. However, under current law, if a minister has pre-tax money in a 403B plan sponsored by his denomination, important point there, then he is allowed to make withdrawals from that plan and have a portion considered tax-free housing allowance. The denomination needs to set a reasonable maximum amount each year, and currently the OPC has set that at $21,000. Of course, if your actual housing expenses were less, you would only claim that lesser amount. While this can be an exceptional opportunity for our retired ministers, I should also restate what I had indicated earlier, namely that we have no guarantee that the housing allowance will continue to exist in perpetuity. The relevant planning point here, though, is that if you have built up a 403B account from your ministerial work, and that account is held elsewhere, you should consider transferring all or at least a portion of that 403B account into the OPC Wipfli plan so that in retirement, you at least would have the possibility of removing significant amounts from that account tax-free. David, let me turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, both Greg and Ken. Thank you, participants and listeners, to this webinar about Will I Ever Be Able to Retire? We want you to know that additional resources have been placed on our webpage. They are listed before you there. Also, if you would have any questions related to what was presented today, you may ask those questions by simply emailing me at david.haney@opc.org. Again, that's david.haney@opc.org. We are so thankful for your participation today in our webinar and look forward to you joining us on future webinars. Very good, and have a great day. Goodbye.